Hey folks, this is Philip with the Everyday Fighter podcast, where we share stories and insights from everyday fighters just like you. Today, I'm speaking with Vanessa Adriance. Vanessa is an attorney and an amateur boxer. She gets into her story of how she got into boxing, but also how it has transformed her life in every way possible. She's really enthusiastic. You'll hear it in her voice how excited she is, and it's really catching. So I hope you enjoy the episode. But before we get into it, I want to jump into our episode spotlight. As a reminder, these spotlights are unsponsored. These folks have no idea who I am. They definitely have no idea that I'm doing this, but every once in a while I run into organizations or individuals that I feel are doing great things in the world, and I just want to share what they're doing. Today I want to talk about the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Now, this is an organization that is available free of charge to anybody that needs help, particularly those that are victims of domestic violence. They have a hotline that's available in over 200 languages. So they have experts and advocates available. They can be reached at 1-800-799-SAFE. That is 1-800-799-7233. They also have a website that has a chat feature that's available as a resource as well. And that can be reached at thehotline.org. That is it for today's spotlight. Let's jump into our conversation with Vanessa Adriance.
Rural New Hampshire, in a log cabin that my dad built. Yeah. In a tiny, tiny town called Sandwich. It's 1,200 people and 100 square miles. So there's nothing there, but I grew up doing a lot of outdoor sports, skiing, swimming, scuba diving. And then I went to boarding school for high school, and I was a rower there. I was a competitive rower through high school and college. So I didn't come to boxing until much, much later. When I was about 35, I was at work, and one of my friends in my office, I'm a lawyer, interviewed someone to come work in our office as a summer associate. And this woman had on her resume under her interest that she boxed. And so, of course, my friend came like sprinting down the hallway and was like, hey, we got to check this out. She asked her about it, and it turned out she had gone to City of Angels in downtown LA. And my friend was like, we got to check this out. And so she did all the legwork. I went with her. And they had classes on heavy bags, like group classes on heavy bags. And your first class was free, and you could borrow equipment. And so I started doing that. And I did that for probably 2 years. And I really loved it. It was a great workout. And I was just doing it like to work out. Wasn't planning on getting in the ring. And then I met Zach Woolman, who you may or may not be familiar with, but he's a pro fighter. He fought out of Wild Card, and he was currently fighting at the time and came and started teaching classes. And he was teaching really more sort of actual boxing technique. Like, okay, you got to put your hands back up, even though the bag's not going to hit you back. If there were someone there, they would. So bring your hand back, that kind of thing. And I thought like, oh, this is sort of interesting. There's some more to sort of learn here. And so I kind of screwed up my courage and asked him if I could spar one time with this other woman in the class, this girl named Ashley. I was like, can Ashley and I get it? And she had never been in the ring before either. And he said, absolutely not. That is not happening. No way, no how, not on my watch. And I kind of deflated. And then he was like, look, you idiot lawyer, if you really want to find out what this is about, you really want to get in, I'll get in with you. And you're like, I will hit you. I will not drop you, but like, I will hit you back. Like, do you want to get in with me? And I was like, great, let's do it. And so then he, of course, promptly forgot about it. He said, go get a mouth guard. We'll do it. Forgot about it. Weeks go by. I keep pestering him. And finally, he's like, oh, all right, fine. Next class on Monday, we'll do this. And so I show up on Monday with like my brand new fresh mouth guard, that I bought at Sports Authority and fitted. It's like, I got a mouth guard. Like, let's do this. And he was like, oh, all right, fine. So we wait until after it's like 9 p.m. Classes are all over. He like goes and finds some old headgear in some corner of the gym, like greases me up. I didn't even know about grease. I didn't know what grease was for. And so I was like, what is happening? What is he doing to me right now? We get in and he says, how many rounds do you want to do? And I said, I don't know, 3. which obviously was the wrong answer. Right. The right answer is 1. And so he's like, all right, well then you're finished in 3. Like, and so we got in. I made it all the way through all 3 rounds on my feet, like finished. One of the other guys in the class cornered me. And we got out. I was like, you've got to teach me. You have got to train me. I love this. It's the best thing I've ever done. You've got to train me. And he was like, all right, fine. So that's sort of how it all started. And he is now my best friend in the world. I've got 9 amateur fights. I train out a wild card now. So that was the beginning. That's how I got into fighting.
Wow. Lots to unpack there. My goodness. Well, you that first introduction to it with your coworker there.
Yeah.
What was it just about novelty then of like boxing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just like I was always sort of up for, whatever silly workout anyone had. Like I'd done the office stair climb team and we'd go hiking. So I was kind of like, yeah, I'm a sporty person. I'll like take a crack at anything, and I kind of thought it would be a one-off sort of thing. And I was terrified. Like when I walked into that gym, I was like, this is a boxing gym and this is all like tough and badass. I was totally terrified. And it was like in a warehouse by the LA River. There was graffiti all over the place. Like it was very cool looking. I was like, I'm not this cool. And then of course, when I went to wild card, I was terrified all over again. Like I remember I was supposed to meet Zach for the first time at wild card. And I parked in the parking lot there and I was afraid to go inside. I literally texted him from the parking lot, like, can I come inside? And he was like, yeah, come inside. And I don't know have you been to wild card? Do you know what the sort of setup is there?
No, I haven't.
So it's on the second floor of this like strip mall in Hollywood at Santa Monica and Vine. And so there's these metal stairs that go up the back. And so I like went up the stairs, Freddie Roach is there all the time. And so I walk in already terrified and come like nose to nose with Freddie. I was like, what have I gotten myself into? What is happening right now? So
I mean, you'd grown up doing sports. So you had some good, presuming you had some good control and you knew how your body worked. Was there a transition for you, even like for that first part of like learning boxing just against the heavy bag for you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Boxing is not like anything else. As you know, it is necessary, but not sufficient to have a good athletic background, So definitely the fact that I had been an athlete all my life, at least I was sort of in shape and I knew that I could, I knew that my body would hold up to things. But even hitting the heavy bag, the first time I hit the heavy bag, I had no idea how hard it was going to be. And hitting the heavy bag is of course exhausting. It's like if you've never fought before and you watch people fighting like on TV or in the movies, like they kind of go forever and no one gets sweaty and no one gets tired. But man, you hit a heavy bag for 3 minutes and like you are sweaty and out of breath, particularly when you don't know how to sort of control yourself. So yeah, it was definitely a big change. And then of course, again, when you go from that to actually sparring and fighting, you just have all the adrenaline from someone else hitting you back and your heart rate is through the roof. And it takes a while to learn to control that. Absolutely. And also I'd only done racing sports, which are, you kind of go in a straight line and it's not the same as having to really have control of yourself in the way that you do when you're in the ring.
You got like an apparatus there. It's different. Well, probably a different context as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like when you're in a boat, like, yeah, you're working really hard, but you're only, when you're rowing, there's not a lot of space for you to move. There's not a lot of variation. You're doing the same thing for however long that race is, whether it's a sprint or, a 3-mile race. So, for 15 minutes or 7 minutes, whatever, you're just doing the same thing. That is not the case with boxing at all.
Well, even when you started just doing the heavy back, was there a feeling of like kind of internal competition for you, or was it more of like kind of that oh, this is like a novelty, oh, let me try it, and what was the thing that kind of kept you in and got going with it?
I think it was a lot of things. I think I am tremendously competitive. So that for sure. It feels good to hit something. Like it just does. It's just a great feeling. So that, and then just sort of being curious, I think, about, what I could do and whether or not I could do it. I think this sort of ties into the thing we were talking about, women's boxing, especially. I had walked around my whole life. I had never been hit in the face, right? Like which is easy to do, I think, in 2019, particularly if you grow up as a girl. But I think even now, more so, even boys are not like getting in schoolyard fights the way they used to, which is maybe a good thing. But I'd gotten to be 35 years old and I'd never been hit, literally, and I didn't know what would happen to me if someone hit me. And so to get the answer to that question, that like, oh, if you get hit in the face, you're okay, was a pretty remarkable thing. It really changes the way you view the world. Again, particularly as a woman, where, women do tend to kind of walk around looking over their shoulders, right? And, wondering what's going to come at them. You're a little bit more on guard, I think, than men are. And so to know if someone grabs me, if someone takes a swing at me, yeah, it's not ideal, but I'm okay. It's not going to kill me, is a really powerful thing to know about yourself. Really kind of changed the way I move through the world all the time. So,
well, you talk about, even just the feeling of hitting the bag, and it just feels good, right?
Yeah.
Did you have kind of because even to me growing up, like the mantra had been, especially in school, it's like, hey, hitting is a bad thing. Expressing yourself in that way is a bad thing. Again, it could be arguable as to whether that's good or not, that
right,
we allow our kids to have little scraps every once in a while. But I know for some folks that come into our gym, I'm like, it takes them a while to kind of just get comfortable. Okay, let me do this, right? And even for especially for women, I just had two new ladies in this past week, and I teach at a martial arts gym here, and the mantra through the rounds was like, I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah.
Right? But was that something that you had to overcome in yourself?
So I weirdly did not, and I don't know what this says about me that I didn't. I didn't think about this for a long time, but I remember that very first day of sparring, as I was getting greased up and getting, geared up, everything, Zach saying to me, he didn't ask me if I'd ever been hit before. He said, have you ever hit anyone before? And that was the question. And I'm sure going to this exact point, right? And at the time I said no, which was true, but I didn't really think about it. And I weirdly did not have a problem throwing a punch at anybody. So that may say something about me. But yeah, for whatever reason, I was always fine with that. So.
But even like when you're hitting the bag, you said you did it for a couple of years, that you're doing that heavy bag type of training. Did you have it in your head in terms of a context of like, I'm hitting somebody in the face right now, or I'm hitting somebody in the body, or no?
I think that I did and I didn't. I had that kind of idea that people get, when you're watching action movies or whatever, and you have this sort of fantasy of like, oh yeah, I'm beating somebody up. But I obviously didn't really know what I was doing. So it was not actually accurate that I would have actually been doing any damage to anybody, Sure. It was like, in truth, I was kind of flailing around and throwing terrible punches and slapping and whatever. But yeah, I think everyone has that sort of like action movie reel in their head, right? So
Sure.
I definitely had that. And I definitely did that thing where it's like, think about whoever made you mad at work today, or whatever fight you've been in with someone, and I got divorced like a year and a half, 2 years ago. So like I had that sort of whole situation throughout, as I was learning to fight as well. So that played into the thoughts as well.
But like, even with that, we all have our fantasy. I knew growing up, Bruce Lee was a big deal for me, and a lot of those kind of kung fu type movies or whatever. It's a fantasy, and there's a kind of, it's almost sterile in a way. It's like you can kind of let it play out, but there's no real sense of, there's no gravitas to it. There's no danger to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it does feel different. I think more so when you're actually sparring than when it's the bag. But yeah, that feeling of like the first time you have that feeling of the first time you hurt somebody, the first time you give someone a black eye or a bloody nose, right? Like that's a real moment. And then the first time you have not just that, because you can land a lucky punch and give someone a black eye or have fairly balanced sparring, but the first time you have that feeling of like, oh, I am beating this person up. Like the first time you get that feeling is a really big moment. I think that's kind of a watershed moment. Which again, I don't know what it says about me, that I was like, ooh, like this is fun. But that said, I broke one of my coach's noses a couple years ago. Who I'm really good friends with, and he had recently had surgery to get it fixed, because he'd broken it like 7 times.
Oh my God.
And he literally recently had it repaired, and then got back in sparring sooner than he should have. and I re-broke it.
Mm.
And part of me was like, yeah, I broke Javier's nose. Like, go you. And then part of me felt terrible because he was in a lot of pain and like spent the night in the hospital. And it was like, oh, geez. Like, so I was conflicted about that, you know?
Mm. Mm.
It's a hard thing to sort of reconcile yourself to. And I mean, luckily, I haven't given anyone any more serious injuries, nor have I had any more serious ones. But I think that would be a little bit harder if you had that, like if you like concussed one of your sparring partners,
Mm.
something like that. In particular, because I think this is the thing people don't get about like people who don't fight. I mean, you, as you know, you are really close to the people you spar with in particular. Like those are really strong, powerful relationships, and you really care about people a lot. I mean, most of my closest friends are people I know from the gym and people that I have hit in the face, and vice versa. So,
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, right?
yeah,
And you try to describe kind of the environment and what you do to somebody completely unfamiliar to it, right? It's like, oh yeah, we
right,
get together and we hit each other. It's like, whoa, really?
right,
And like there's to do it properly, there's got to be some intent in there, right? It's like
right,
I'm
yeah,
going to do this to this person, right? And
right, yeah. I mean,
who I adore.
right, like the Mike Tyson, like throw a punch with bad intentions kind of thing. But yeah, you do, or else it doesn't. It's not really effective. Like nobody gets out of it what they're looking for, right?
Yes,
So yeah.
absolutely.
But it's also people do also ask me, well, like you're not really trying to hurt somebody when you're, and I'm like, no, yeah, I am. But I feel like people don't really understand that. Like people who don't fight are like, oh, well, no one's actually trying to do any damage. You're not really hitting that hard. And no,
Mhm.
you are.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to the intent of it, right? It's because if you're looking, you've been training and it's like, okay, this is the idea I have in my head for like what I'm doing to this, say, a heavy bag.
Mhm.
The heavy bag doesn't give you any feedback, other than, okay, you made contact, right?
Right.
Fact of like, okay, oh wow, that person kind of buckled a little bit. There's some feedback there.
Right. Yeah. 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 When you hear the person like, ugh, like making a noise in the body or whatever, or if you see them bleeding, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I want to go a little bit to what you brought up as far as like actually hitting somebody else. I mean,
Mhm.
you said it came fairly easy to you because I mean, like it sounded like you're on a mission. You knew what you had to do. But were there points that you can recall where it's like, wow, there's some weight to this now that I actually have this power in my hands?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that like both ways, it makes you realize both that you have this power and also sort of how little power you have. I
Hmm.
think. I mean, again, I think because people, at least I had this sort of action movie fantasy reel in my head, right? And you both realize that you can do damage to someone, and also how strong. Like people will say to me again, like, "Oh, like." You can beat up the guys, I'm sure. And I'm like, no, you don't understand how much stronger men are than women.
Mm.
And, believe me, like that does not thrill me, but it's just the truth. Like
Mm.
I am not beating up a guy unless he is significantly smaller than me.
Mm.
That's just the truth. So I think you realize it both ways, and it affects how you handle yourself both at the gym and otherwise.
Mm. Mm. Were there time? I mean, you mentioned that with your coach when you broke his nose that you felt
Yeah.
pretty bad about that.
Yeah.
How do you handle it typically out if you're with like a friend or somebody that's quite frankly that might be new,
Yeah.
like they're not sure what to expect, and then now it's like, okay, they got a little something from Vanessa here. Like what is that dynamic like?
I mean, I think that certainly if I have someone new in particular, I'm obviously not going to like blast away at somebody brand new. In part because you were talking about sort of like passing this down to the people who were a day, a week, a month, a year behind me, and your daughters and all that kind of stuff. People did that for me. Obviously, people who had way more experience than I did got in the ring with me, worked with me, hit me hard enough so that I learned something, but did not just flatten me, did not make me not want to come back. And so I am cognizant of sort of paying that forward. And I think there's a line, you have to hit somebody hard enough. And some people are just not, they're going to say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. This is no good. so you have to test them a little bit, but that said, you can't just crack somebody brand new. It's not a good thing to do. It's not fair to them. You don't get anything out of it. And it's not sort of paying that debt forward, that people have done for me. So I am conscious of that. It also does take a while to sort of learn that control, I think, and certainly it's something that I'm still working on as well, but I am certainly conscious of it when I get someone but then also you never know, like, as one of my coaches would say, don't sleep on anybody. You get someone who maybe says they're kind of green or has fewer fights than you. And sometimes those people are sometimes they're way better than their resume might suggest. Or B, sometimes like people who don't have a lot of experience will do kind of crazy stuff. Yeah. And every once in a while, crazy stuff lands.
Right.
It's like you expect the 1-2, and then you get like a 1 and an uppercut, and you're like, oh,
True.
So,
have you been on the other side of that coin though? Like in terms of like you mentioned, okay, there's some people that they go into it, maybe they last for a little, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is not for me. Or like, were there times when you questioned being there?
So I definitely have had bad days of sparring, bad fights, like all of that. I've never felt like I wanted to quit. I always was sort of in it, and from day one, I kind of like fell in love with boxing so hard right off the bat. I never thought about leaving. I did have moments after I lost. So my first 2 fights were in a tournament, and I won the first fight, and then I lost the second one. And it was in North Carolina, so I was very far from home. And I had this moment where I was like, I honestly thought that I was not going to be allowed back to the gym. I thought that I was going to, no one was going to speak to me again, that I had just ruined all of my friendships and relationships. I remember getting out of the ring and I cried for an hour. I was a hot mess. But I wanted to go back. And actually when I talked to Zach, who was training me at the time, I years later, I said, when did you know that I was sticking with this? When did you stop writing me off as this dumb, pudgy lawyer who's, going to quit? And I thought he was going to say after I've been training you for a couple of months, or when you told me that you wanted to fight, or when you came with me to Wild Card. And he said, no, when you came back after losing that fight, that's when I knew you were not quitting. That was the thing. So, but other than that, I've had definitely terrible days of sparring. I've definitely gotten out of the ring and cried. I've definitely bled all over the place for hours and all that. So
a lot of times, especially in these combat type sports and hobbies, if you will, so much emphasis is put on just the injury, the physical aspect of it, the blood, and you talk about the black eyes and that type of thing. But a lot of times, very rarely, I'd say, or probably not enough, is the idea of that emotional aspect of it.
Yeah.
Having to deal with that and kind of going through that. What's that like for you?
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I mean, I think it really does. It has a really powerful emotional effect that nobody talks about. People do really focus on the blood and the bruises, and because you have such strong emotional ties with the people that you train with and spar with, or at least I always have. So that was really powerful for me. And again, it really sort of gave me a much better idea of the person that I was and how tough or not I was, and sort of where my weak spots were. You really get to know yourself. And so that was something good and bad. So that was definitely something that I wrestled with a lot and thought about a lot, because I did learn a lot about myself. I mean, again, including the fact that I was in a really terrible marriage that I had to get out of. I did not get divorced because of boxing, but without boxing, I'm not sure how much longer it would have taken. And I definitely figured out a lot of things in the ring and in the aftermath of fighting, that got me out of that relationship. So, I learned a ton about myself, just again, how tough I was, and also sort of what real good relationships looked like. All of a sudden I had these good relationships with the people that I knew from the gym. And I realized that was not what I had in the rest of my life. Like that they were just night and day. So, and my husband was very anti-boxing and like hated everything about it. So, and really couldn't wrap his brain around the emotional part of it. Like after I lost that first fight, he was like, "Great, you're done fighting. You can pay attention to me again now." I was like, "No, like I need to go sit in a closet for 3 days and process everything that has just happened to me and everything that I've just done before I can even have a conversation with you," you know? And he couldn't get that. So
That's interesting. I mean, because again, I think about people from the outside in listening to this, and it's like, boxing and your marriage, how could those two things get intertwined, and how could you, because it's easy to compartmentalize them,
right, yeah.
right? But the fact that you know your time in the ring, the time in your gym gave you, what would you say, like in terms of like your relationship?
I mean, I think that like I said, it gave me other relationships that were all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is what it looks like to have people actually care about me and not just care that I'm paying their mortgage, you know, that for one thing. And again, for another, it was really showed me that I could make it through a tough situation, and also that I could do things that were not necessarily sort of in the script for like 35-year-old lawyer, like, you know, going out and fighting amateur fights when you were a 35-year-old big law firm lawyer is not in the standard script. It's not what you're supposed to do. People look at me like I'm crazy. You know, I would show up at depositions and in court with a black eye, and people would be like, right? Yeah. And so it sort of gave me a way to realize that I could kind of build whatever sort of life that I wanted to, and that I didn't have to sort of follow the script. And so, you know, I didn't, and it was like, I had like my husband was not, he was not like, you know, abusive. He was not like, it was like on the surface, he was fine. And it was like, I gotta have to put up with that. I gotta have to put up with all the other crap just because there's nothing like obviously horrendous here. You know, like I am miserable. And so I can move on from this, even if he's not punching me in the face, which by the way, I really wished he would have done, because it turns out that if, if your spouse abuses you, you don't have to pay them spousal support in California. But so yeah, and then also again, I think a lot of it was the relationships. Like, you know, he never wanted to, was always irritated at my friendships from the gym and didn't like any of my boxing friends, and was always like, "Why are you spending so much time with this when you could be like sitting at home with me, like watching TV?" And it's like, it's not. I don't want to do that. And I also don't want you to be a jerk to people that I care about, who are frankly the people who are going to take me to the emergency room if need be. Like, you should be nice to these people. They're going to call 911 if I get a concussion, you know? So I think it was all that.
It's you know, I really like what you're saying, that it wasn't, well, one, you had the wherewithal to actually do it, quite frankly. I mean, regardless of whether it was just initially novelty or like, oh yeah, it's a way to get in shape or that type of thing. But the fact is, you know, that really isn't, and even, well, now it's more of like, oh yeah, it's kind of gone a little bit more mainstream. A lot of like places are doing kind of boxing type stuff, even online. Right. But the fact that it isn't on the script, like you're saying, and then seeing yourself like, oh yeah, I can do something that is unexpected, not only by other people's standards, but probably by yours. It sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was definitely, if you had asked me, you know, 10 years ago or when I was in high school, whatever, if this was going to be my life, I would have never believed you, you know, it never would have occurred to me. But that was a great thing. And it's, again, it sort of opened my eyes to just having the ability to kind of, I was always very cautious and very sort of risk averse. And I still am to some degree. I mean, lawyers are sort of by nature risk averse, right? Like that's our job, to assess risk and mitigate it. But to sort of accept my own judgment and trust myself a little bit more, and to know that like I'm not an idiot. And so if I look at something and think, you know, I want to do this and I think this can work, I can probably trust that assessment, and that it's worth sort of taking a smaller chance, like even, or just making the extra effort and making it happen. Like even a year ago, I was going to go visit a friend who lives in Barcelona. And I had like planned the trip and bought the plane tickets. And like a week before I was supposed to get on the plane, I realized that my passport was not good for long enough. Right. Right. Exactly. And yeah. And I was like, oh shit. And it was one of those deals where I had like, it wasn't expired, but you know how you need a certain amount of time left on your passport to go to a particular country. So I didn't have enough time left on it to get in and out of Spain, according to their laws. And like me before boxing would have been like, well, this is impossible. Like, this is too hard. I don't think I can solve this problem. Like, this is just going to be like so many hoops to jump through. And like, I don't know if I can do this. And then I was like, no, I can do this. I can solve this problem. I can get myself to the federal building. I can drive all over LA and collect the paperwork and I can get this done. And of course I did. And I went to Spain and it was amazing. Or like later last year, I had said I wanted to leave the country twice during the year. That had been like my New Year's resolution. And I got to December and I hadn't left the country again. Mm. And I was like, I'm getting on a plane. I'm going somewhere. I'm going to do this, even if it's, you know, it's not going to be, 2 weeks in, Southeast Asia or whatever, but I'm going somewhere. And so I bought a plane ticket to Calgary and I went skiing by myself for a weekend in Banff. And it was fantastic. And it's something that I never would have thought to do before. Like I never would have just trusted myself to be like, yeah, like you can figure this out. You can do this by yourself. You can buy the plane tickets. You can rent the car. You can go skiing on your own. You'll be fine. And I had a fantastic time and I'm so glad I went. So it just sort of spread into other areas of my life that like, yeah, you can go do things. You can, you don't need someone to go with you. You don't need someone to help you. You're smart enough. You have the resources. You can make things happen if you want to.
Mm-hmm. It's, I like what you say, kind of like spilled over. I mean, I think when you do something so transformational for yourself in one area, you can't help but to get into to others, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it really has affected every area of my life. Again, it just changed the way that I sort of move through the world, the way I interact with people, the way I see myself. And I struggle with deciding whether it changed me or just made me sort of realize who I have been all along, And I prefer to land on the latter, that it was just sort of because like I know that I have talked to old friends of mine. I have friends that I've had, my whole life or since high school or whatever. And when I talk to them about boxing and when I talk to them about sort of the way I live my life now, yes, like this is the person that we know. This is what we would have expected from you. Whereas my ex-husband was very much, he would say like, who are you? What's happening now? This doesn't make any sense. The people who've known me longer than that are all like, yeah, this is right. This is the Vanessa that we've known.
Like it didn't surprise them that this is where you're at.
Or like, even if the specifics, like even if they're like, okay, we wouldn't have thought you were going to box, but all the rest of it doesn't surprise them. They're like, okay, well, if this is going to be the thing, it's not surprising that, you would go at it gung ho, that you would love it, that you would make a bunch of friends doing it, sort of all the pieces and parts that went with it, even if the particular avenue is surprising to them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you're saying though, in that, is it one or the other in terms of, did boxing change you, or did it just, allow you to rediscover who you really were anyway, or allow you to let that out?
Right. Yeah. Like I said, that's something that I keep wrestling with. And I've been working on a book about my whole sort of boxing experience. And in working on that, like I said, I sort of landed on, I think it revealed both the good and bad parts of myself than that, because it also, like I said, reminded me that I'm super competitive to a kind of pathological degree. And I always have been, but man, like boxing will bring that out in spades, so that kind of thing. Or that, like that losing that fight almost like really kind of broke me for a minute. That kind of thing. Like that was not my best moment for sure. I've had moments of sparring that have been really ugly, right? Like those are not my proudest moments. So both ways. And those are sort of like aspects of my personality that I've kind of known about. And even when I was a kid, like I went to boarding school as a kid, right? And when I went off to boarding school, like people would ask me, like, are you sad to leave home? Are you homesick when you're 14? And I was like, no, like let's go. Like, I'm here for this. So it was a sort of similar, like, I was ready to take the leap at that point in my life. And then, as I like got into sort of professional life, I lost that sort of willingness to jump into things. And now I've kind of found it again.
Do you think a bit of that came as a result of the career path that you chose for yourself? Because you're saying like, hey, it's about like reducing or at least mitigating risk.
Yeah, I'm sure that definitely has something to do with it. For sure. I mean, the legal profession, like I said, is very much about mitigating risk and also dealing with things when they go wrong, right? I mean, I'm a litigator, so anyone who calls me, it's like something has gone wrong. You do not find yourself in court unless something has gone awry, right? And also, the legal profession is very high stress. Law school is expensive. Like, you spend a lot of money on your education, and you come out of it feeling like, okay, I got to make this work. Like, I don't have a lot of other options. You kind of narrowed your path. And also, it does have a really specific path and track that you're kind of supposed to follow. So yeah, I think I did kind of fall into that, and that did help sort of shunt me off away from making those jumps and taking those chances. And again, like, I moved to LA sort of not knowing anybody, not knowing the city, right after law school, after Hurricane Katrina, because I went to school in New Orleans. So I kind of came out of all that craziness and trauma looking for stability, and kind of really doubled down on the stability, to my detriment, as it turns out, although I didn't realize it at the time.
Yeah, it's the thing initially. Well, at the time you think this is really what I want, but sometimes it's easy to fall in the trap of like, this is what I want forever, as opposed to this is what I want and what we need to needs to happen for right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, just because it's the right thing for now, that doesn't mean it's permanent, but you don't always realize that. You think like, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm doing forever.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. I mean, because, it's the same way, like when you're sparring or in the ring, it's like, okay, this is my plan initially for one reason or another. Maybe you studied tape, or maybe it's like, okay, well, this is just what I'm going to go into, but 2 seconds, 2 rounds in, you got to start pivoting, right?
Yeah. And it's like, you never know. It's like, the second tournament I fought. So, the girl that I fought in the finals, I had watched her preliminary fight the previous day, and she'd fought one way. And it's like, I talked to my coach. It was the same guy whose nose I broke. And we're like, all right, we saw her fight. We know how she fights. Like, here's the game plan. And then I got in the next day, and she did the complete opposite. And so it was like, okay, well, that game plan goes out the window, and like, just work with what's in front of you. But we had sat down and like game planned everything out based on what we had seen, and then none of it happened to be the truth. So yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely like it's a microcosm of like life at times.
Right.
Sometimes life actually happens that quickly as well, but
the Joyce, you've read Joyce Carol Oates's book on boxing, I'm sure, right?
No. Mm-mm.
Oh, it's so good. Well, so it's a great book altogether, but she's got this, this is more or less, she says, boxing isn't a metaphor for life. Life's a metaphor for boxing.
Mm.
And I always find that, I think it's really smart, and I think it's more or less right. Like, boxing or fighting, I think you could expand it to like fighting sports, but like, that's kind of the core of everything. And everything else is this kind of elaborate way that we play this stuff out. Whether it's like arguments in court, or like the conversation that you're having with your neighbor or whatever, like, it's just window dressing on kind of like this survival fighting thing that we've been doing since we were, not even human, right?
It's so, and I try to explain this at times where it's, I don't think I'm very successful at it, but I mean, that's where we came from. Right?
Yeah.
It's already innate in us, and the consequences of letting that out over time, and depending on the context of it. I mean, going from schoolyard brawls, scuffles to like war. You'll see like, okay, there are some consequences. There's definitely some downsides to letting kind of the thing that we have inside us out. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be suppressed. And I think a lot of what we see now is about that. It's like, just even when I was growing up, like I said, like, fighting was a bad thing. Don't let it out. Like, just if at the best, just forget that it's there.
Hmm.
If nothing else, deny that it's there and just fall in line with
Right.
what's supposed to be nice and just even keel in society and hanging out. Which nothing wrong with that, but ultimately there's something inside us, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was talking to my best friend the other day. He's coaching kids and teaching them to box, and he was saying that apparently now kids don't really get in schoolyard fights in part because they're always like on their phones or on the internet all the time, right? And they are like bullying each other like via the internet and across the country. And he was saying that they sort of just don't like they're losing something by not interacting with people, even in that way. Like you think of people losing the sort of like the flip side of it, right? Like the warmth of human interaction, but they're also losing something by not by like offloading all of the bad stuff to this sort of virtual world and not just like you get in a fight and it's done with, and so like teaching them to fight is really like he's put it as teaching them to fight is like actually making them more sensitive and better able to interact with people, right?
Yes.
Which I think is totally accurate but really interesting.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I found, it was very surprising to me. um in my morning class that I teach, a few women are in there. They're mothers. They've got careers and things like that themselves, But one of the things I noticed about them, particularly when we spar with them, or I see them sparring, is this toughness
Hmm.
there. And I know a little bit about their backgrounds and how they are, and just getting to know them over years. It's like that's something I think they'd have to cultivate in themselves, even
Hmm.
more so that it's something that they're proud of. Okay, well, it's time for me to get tough. Let me and turn it on in here, right?
Yeah.
But then, it can absolutely, it has absolutely served them. But then there's the other part of it. You're talking about as far as sensitivity. It's like, listen, there's the other side of that as well that you really have to allow in, which is
Hmm.
not just, okay, put on the armor, but like having that sensitivity, being allowing yourself to feel in that
Right.
environment as well, that could still serve you.
Right. Yeah. It's like fighting is not about just like being angry and tough all the time. And people think that it's sort of like, oh, you're just mad and you're going to beat the crap out of someone. And that's like not at all what it's about. Like you have to, like you do have to feel those things and you also have to think in the midst of it. And also that there's that thing about, how fighters always hug each other, right? After fights, or almost always. I mean, there's always the exception, but like you will see pro fighters after like big, nasty, ugly fights. Like as soon as the bell rings, they hug, right? And the same with when you're done with sparring. It's like you have to have both sides of it. And like I said, your sparring partners are the ones who will, God forbid, like call 911 if you need to, and they are the ones who are gonna like mop the blood up and all that kind of stuff. Like I remember sort of realizing that there was a moment when I was sparring at the gym and I got a bloody nose and I didn't even realize it. Like I was just in the middle of it, and I got out, and there was this guy who I had seen at the gym, and he was like, "Oh, you're bleeding," and I was like, and he was like, "Let me go," and he went and got like Kleenex, toilet paper, or whatever, and he didn't unglove me. Like instead of taking my gloves off, he like wiped the blood off of my face himself. Which is such a small thing, but there's this weird kind of like physical intimacy in fighting sports, I think, and in gyms that you just sort of don't get in other places. Or even I was reading an article, some woman had written this piece about taking like a class on bags, right? And she'd never boxed before. And she wrote about how it was frustrating that she couldn't get water for herself because she was gloved up and so she couldn't pick up her water bottle. And as I was reading it, I thought, that's right, except it's never occurred to me because when you're in an actual fighting gym, everyone is always just giving everyone water, right? Like even if it's not your trainer or your sparring partner or whoever, it's like whoever's got the water bottle in their hand will be like, "Oh, do you want some water?" and squirt some in your mouth, like all the time. Or whoever will like tie your shoes for you. There's this very sort of easy physical closeness that happens in those environments, which I think is unusual in the world we live in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's beautiful, right? But like
Yeah.
being able to find, and you see some photographers, artists, a lot of other contexts where they'll they can find the beauty in some of the thing that most people would shun or just kind of like turn their head at,
Hmm.
right? But I found that to be the case, to your point, especially in the ring.
Yeah.
And for me, like the thing that's most touching is when I see it of children doing it. So you get
Hmm.
share an example. I went and brought my two girls that are training right now to a tournament, and it wasn't even their match. I saw somebody, another child about their age in the match, and he was dominating this other
Hmm.
kid. And but he kicked him, and I don't think it was. I don't know if it was like he injured the kid, but maybe he just also his balance a little bit. But he went over. He picked up the kid. He said, "Hey, are you okay? Come on up." And
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
almost lost it there. But I was like,
Right,
that's the side that because the highlight reel is the knockout.
right.
Highlight reel is the winning shot, right? But there's very seldomly will we see the things where like you can see that humanity in people come out.
Right. Yeah, but I think it really does come out in fighting sports. Again, yeah, it's not on the highlight reel, but I think when you're in the gym day in and day out, you really do see that. You see the people who stay at the gym late just to watch you spar, or who will wipe the sweat out of your eyes, or fix your hair for you, or loan you their gear if yours is gone missing, or all that kind of stuff. We'll take care of things for you, and that happens all the time. And I think it happens more in fighting sports than in other gyms and in other sports, right? I think people really take care of each other in fighting sports in a way they don't, frankly, like kind of in the world in general.
Yeah, I have this kind of idea of and I can't remember when I wrote this a couple of years ago. It's the concept of love your opponent.
Yeah.
Because it's like they're in there doing the exact same thing that you're doing, and there's a level of respect that
Right.
comes with that, right? It's like, oh my gosh, thank you for
Right.
helping me, and thank you for allowing me to help you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because it's like you don't get to do it without them, and vice versa, right? Like you need each other in order to be able to get to do this thing that you both love to do, and you have this huge thing in common, right? I mean, I think everyone can appreciate the idea that you build bonds through like hard work and suffering, right? Like anyone you suffer with, you have a bond with, whether it is like people who go through like medical residency together or whatever, or people who like go through natural disasters together, or fighting. You build bonds much more quickly and much more powerfully when you suffer with someone, right?
Hmm.
um, and I think the gym is like fighting sports are a way to do that, without having to like suffer through a terrible natural disaster or whatever. Although, I mean, I thought about this during Hurricane Katrina, because like I said, I was in New Orleans for Katrina, and which was awful in many ways. But one thing that was fascinating about it was that once people started filtering back into the city, because we were kicked out for like 6 weeks. Once people started filtering back, you all of a sudden had so much in common with everybody in the city.
Hmm.
Like you all had this massive shared experience with an entire city of people. And it was a really powerful and interesting thing. Like you would be, waiting in line at a bar to use the bathroom and have this conversation with someone like, "Oh, where'd you evacuate to? Have you gotten rid of your refrigerator yet?" Like that kind of thing. You just had this tremendous reservoir of conversation and sympathy. So I think it's kind of like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. What is your focus these days when it comes to boxing and the things around there? I mean, you mentioned a book earlier, but even in addition to that, what when you talk to people about boxing, or you have it in your head, is there something that's pulling you forward now, or is there a focus point for you?
I mean, I am trying to fight as much as I can this year because I'm 39. So next year I will be too old to fight regular amateur, and I'll have to fight masters. So I'm trying to get a few more fights in this year. And then really it's just like learning as much as I can and just kind of like getting better, day by day. That's really kind of it. It's really simple, and not a big giant goal, but it's just like every day showing up at the gym and working on whatever my coach says I need to work on, which is a lot. And like trying to keep whatever that is in mind, and hopefully take a step forward every day. It's that simple. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then I mean, secondary to that also is like you said, I'm kind of paying it forward to the extent that I can. So like working with whoever is below me, behind me, just like telling people like, yeah, you can do this. Because people do have those moments of doubt, which I did too. Like, do I fit here? Am I allowed in this space? It doesn't seem like the space for whatever kind of person I am. And so being like, yeah, no, it's like all you have to do is show up, like, and work hard. That's it. You don't have to, you don't have to have started this when you were 5 years old. You don't have to have some like hard luck Mike Tyson story. Like, all you got to do is show up and take a punch and punch somebody back. There's a thing people don't realize,
Like, yeah, I like what you said there. Like, you don't need to have that kind of that story. And I think you alluded to it earlier, particularly when it came to your marriage, right? Where it's like, well, he wasn't physically abusing me, but it didn't but it was okay that I was just unhappy and I wanted to do something about my unhappiness.
Right. Yeah. It's like, it's okay to kind of like build whatever life you want to build. And so, yeah, it's okay to show up at the boxing gym and say, yeah, I want to fight no matter who you are. It's okay to kind of, change your career path, change your relationships. If that's what you want to do and you're not, like barring, like, don't murder anybody. But yeah, like you have way more leeway than I think people tend to think that they have. Sort of across the board. And I think people have this really narrow view of who is a fighter and who can go show up at a boxing gym or a fighting gym and who can get in the ring and what kind of person that is. And it's like, no, like anybody can do it. You just have to do it. But there's no rule that says you have to be XYZ kind of person in order to do it. Right. You can be blonde white girl from New Hampshire who went to boarding school and, go thug it out in the ring.
Well, I think that's powerful, and that because we're brought up, and I think this is one of the things that I'm trying to be very cognizant of, particularly with 4 daughters there, and I remember seeing just what they came with into this world, right? Just like this curiosity and just like, wow, creativity and all of that. And it's the balance of like, well, bringing them into like the world now, where it's not saying now, but just this world in general, at any time, where it's like, well, this is how it works here. But I'm trying to be very careful not to crush what they came in with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a tough balance, right? It's like you don't want to sort of tell them like, oh, you can do anything and like everything's going to be fine always, because obviously that's not true. Like, would that it were, but it's not. But yeah, you want to let them know that it's okay to try things and it's okay to go off script. And I think it's a balance of like building that foundation of knowing that you're not an idiot, and in fact not being an idiot, but also being willing to sort of take some risk. And like, to my parents' credit, they were always very much, you can kind of do whatever you want within reason, like don't be an idiot, but get an education, be able to support yourself, but you can do anything you want. And like my dad was not happy with the boxing when I started and now has gotten totally on board and is like totally fine with it and bought me new headgear for Christmas and been to Wild Card and sort of like, I watched me spar once and was like, I think that other girl was better than you. And I was like, thanks, Dad.
Now, let me ask you, why do you think that is? Why do you think that turnaround from your dad came?
Well, I mean, I think that he obviously, he didn't want me to get hurt. He's got no experience in fighting sports. He's super athletic, but not a fighting sports person, has never even watched fighting sports, never been a fighter himself. And so like what he said to me initially was, you make your living with your eyes and your brain. What is wrong with you? Which is not wrong, right? It's not crazy. And I think that it was really 2 things. First of all, once he saw how much I loved it and how much of a change it made in my life, I think that was the big thing. And then, but it took a while. There was an adjustment period. At first he was like, okay, I have to stop just giving her a hard time about this. I'm not getting on board, but I need to stop directly telling her to stop. And so he started sending me newspaper clippings about like football players with concussions and just being like, FYI, I thought you might be interested, for no real reason. About the study about head trauma in football players. He sent me like a whole bunch of those articles. And then finally, he sort of realized that it was not going away. And then also, frankly, a couple of his friends sat him down and they were like, look, either you're going to have a real ugly fight with Vanessa, or you can get on this train, because this train is clearly like not stopping. And then, and then also once he met sort of the crew, because he's back in New Hampshire, and so he hadn't met the people, and so I think in his head he was just, again, sort of like, oh, like you're in a boxing gym and a bunch of guys are hitting you in the face, like what? And once he sort of met all of the people and saw how great the gym was and what a great environment the gym is and how people really do take care of each other, I think that made a big difference too. You know, like as my best friend Zach was like teaching him how to throw a jab at Christmas dinner, 3 years ago, which I have video of, but it's amazing. I think that was kind of a big thing for him to realize, like, oh, these people actually are taking care of her. Like these relationships really are real and are valuable. Because I think all any parent wants, right? Or one of the things parents want is to know that other people care about their kids, right? And are looking out for them, right? I mean, you can tell me whether or not that's accurate, but I think that's a big thing for parents, right? To feel like their kid is not sort of like alone in the world, even if they're not there, right?
Absolutely. Especially in those times where they know that I know that there's going to be challenging moments, right?
Right.
That there'll be someone there to kind of help them through that process, as opposed to just like, oh, just get over it. Kind of
right.
thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
But that requires good people, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think knowing that there were good people there made a big difference to him. And so now he's fully on board.
Yeah. No, that's a big deal. I mean, we talked about like kind of even the internal struggles, the internal. And this is what is why I brought it up earlier, is like, like for my girls to think of like, well, if my dad is saying, okay, well, there's rules about this, there's rules about that in these contexts, that must mean that there's rules around everything. So even getting into boxing, there's a rule for me I have to have come from a bad upbringing.
Right.
Or even like, even when you're saying like, as far as getting out of a marriage that you're unhappy with, the rule is not that you have to have been physically abused to get out of an unhappy marriage, right? But then, so that's like kind of like internal rules and that type of thing, and like the things we struggle internally to do what we want to do. But then there's the external stuff, which like parents, like people, maybe, I don't even know if you got that in your office of like, whoa, you're really taking this on now, Vanessa. Like,
oh yeah, yeah.
No,
I definitely did.
Remarks, right?
Right. Yeah, I definitely had, particularly when I started showing up at work with, bruises on my face and stuff like that. Like, I got a lot of looks and a lot of questions about like, what is happening in your life? Like, what are you doing? Why are you always beat up? Yeah, for sure. And like you said, like the world does impose these rules on us, whether it's like people in your office saying, why are you beat up? This is not appropriate. Or like sort of like Fight Club moments, like, is that your blood? Some of it.
Yeah.
Or, to go back to the divorce context, right? Like the state of California makes it really expensive and really difficult to get out of a marriage. Like it is not easy and it is not cheap. And I kept being like, why does the state of California want me to stay in a bad relationship? Like, why are they making this so hard? But it does require some real effort to get over those hurdles, and to know that you can break those rules, but you've got to put some work into it. And like people are going to try to constrain you and keep you in those boxes.
So how did it end up with work? Was it such that they just like, okay, well, they got used to it, or did you have a talking to, or did you like, how did that play out?
So I worked in a pretty big office. It was not my current job, it was my previous job. And so, sort of like the knowledge that I was fighting sort of like filtered out slowly. And there was the guy who was the partner in charge of the office was on my floor and was someone that I knew pretty well and was friendly with. And so he knew. And then there was a guy who was like on the executive committee, who did not know. And I kept running into him when I was just beat to hell. And so finally I went to the partner in charge of the office and I was like, look, Chris, you have got to call this guy and like tell him that I am not, like getting in street fights or being abused by a
vigilante or whatever. Yeah, right.
Yeah, like you've got to like I can feel his look and you got to manage this for me, please. Which he did, and it was fine. And then my current job, I had already been boxing when I started this job, and so it was like on my resume when I interviewed, and everyone is fully on board. Like it's all anyone asks about me. Like in the elevator, people ask everyone else about what cases you're working on, and they ask me like, hey, got any fights coming up? Yeah. Nice. It's fine by me. So they're fully on board.
Well, it's interesting. Like, and I was going to ask you that. I was like kind of coming full circle to the way that you were introduced to this whole thing as well. It's like now you got it on your resume. Like, well, wait a minute.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And it definitely is like, it's on my interests. I've got my record on my resume, which hopefully I won't need to use for a while, but yeah, you know, and it is I can't stop talking about it. It's like the first thing anyone knows about me.
Sure. But now I can only imagine, like, you know, somebody seeing that and it's like, okay, well, maybe let's try out this heavy bag class kind of a thing, you know?
I mean, hopefully, totally. And actually, I put a boxing gym in my house. So I've definitely had friends come over and been like, I mean, I am not qualified to actually teach anybody to fight, obviously. But like, yo, come over. I'll show you how to throw a 1-2. I'll show you how to wrap your hands. You can mess around with the bags in my house. Like I did it with my cousin, a couple of other friends. And, you know, we had a fun time just like messing around with the bags, and they got to try it out, see what it feels like to put on a pair of gloves and throw a punch in a heavy bag or a double end bag or whatever. So, yeah.
That's awesome. This was amazing. Really appreciate you taking this time to chat and share so much about, again, this is a big deal for me because I want to see more, two things, more of a conversation about not just the flashy physical stuff, you know, the drama around fighting, that type of thing, you know, the thing that like makes people kind of turn, but, you know, it's kind of show like the other side of it.
Right.
But the second thing is having more women, having more role models for women and girls. Like this is something that you can do. It's not just a male thing in terms of like fighting, you know, in that kind of sense. And we talk about fight or flight all the time. I mean, teach self-defense classes, and, you know, that's one of the big things, but it's one of the few things that's really talked about, like outside of the, you know, that hour and a half context of like, you can fight, you have it inside you already. That's just directing it. So yeah, it's
yeah. And I think especially for women, I think sports are so huge for women in particular because, you know, frankly, the way that like society treats women's bodies, right, as like instruments for everybody else and not for yourself, whether it's for appearance or to have kids and that's it or whatever. I mean, I'm not going to get political, but you know, there are a lot of other demands on women's bodies. And so to be able to do something with your body that is for yourself and that is fully within your control, I think is really powerful. And I think that is not even just fighting sports, but sports in general. To do something that is not about how your body looks, it's not about what it can do for somebody else, is a great feeling. It is really important for women and girls to experience and to know is out there. And, you know, like I said, sports were super important to me. Even in high school, sports were kind of like where I found my identity. And changed my life then too. When I found rowing, it totally changed my world. It made such a difference to me. So I think it's really important for girls to have some kind of athletic experience.
Awesome. Vanessa, this is great. I think that, you know, the people that find themselves to this are going to probably want to get more of you. Where could they do that?
So I'm on Instagram. I'm at Adriance, Vadraince. Like I said, I'm also working on this book, which I have just sent a revision to my agent. So hopefully that'll be out. I mean, there's a lot of things to happen, but I'm hoping to get that published in the next couple of years. So it's a long timeline. I've also written a couple of articles that went up on Puncher Media. It's punchermedia.com. And I wrote one article about sort of my experience getting into boxing, and then one about the last tournament I fought in Atlanta, which was an all-women's tournament, which was fantastic. So those places too. And I'm on Facebook as well.
Vanessa Adriance, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really great.
Folks, I hope you appreciated that chat with Vanessa. As I mentioned, she is very enthusiastic about boxing, but you know, rightfully so, because it has changed her life so much for the positive. And she's a great advocate for the sport, and I'm glad that I was able to share her story with you. That's it for today's episode. This is Philip with the Everyday Fighter Podcast. Talk to you next time.